Did the Greeks and Romans have paperback books? What about Post-it notes? What do they use for grocery and laundry list? How much did books cost? These and other questions will be answered right after this. I'm Professor Jerome Arkenberg, and I've been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you about how information passed from one generation to another in oral memorial societies, and how that affected those societies. The writing material used by the ancient Greeks and Romans, the scroll, codex, and wax tablet, and the cost of books in the Greco-Roman world. At the end, I'll have the wrap-up quote on this video. But first, make sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe, and the little bell thingy, so I can continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. All societies around the world began as both oral and memorial societies, with all information passed on orally from one generation to another, meaning all knowledge is fluid and, since it relies on memory, inaccurate, such that any changes in present-day ideas or relationships can cause changes in how the past, and hence the present, is perceived. Thus, tales, laws, and rituals will always reflect the needs of current audiences. For example, at the end of the 19th century, British anthropologists wrote down a story that explained why a particular Nigerian confederation had 7 tribes. Because it all went back, or so went the founding story of this confederation, to a king who had 7 sons, from which the then current 7 tribes of the confederation stemmed. In the 1950s, other British anthropologists heard this same tale, but this time the tale had it that the founding king only had 5 sons, because now the confederation only had 5 tribes. One in the meantime had been expelled, and another had gotten so small it had been absorbed by one of the others. Now, when the anthropologist asked about the discrepancy in the tale, them asserting that there used to be 7 sons, all the tribespeople thought the Brits had simply been out in the sun too long, as they all asserted there had only ever been 5 sons. So a political change within living memory had changed the tale, which had only ever been passed on orally among the tribespeople, so that they no longer remembered, or chose to remember, that there were originally 7 sons, which also shows the difficulty of using oral tales, legends, epics, etc. as actual history. There may be, and often is, an actual kernel of truth in there. But which is history, and which is later changes, accretions, etc., is simply too difficult to tell. And there are many more documented instances of such change, both in the past and even today, among different parts of the world. So the key thing to remember here is, no telling is entirely accurate from one recitation to another. As studies of modern tale tellers, remembrancers, as they are generally called today, do not remember the tale, the law, or the ritual, word for word, but instead, these remembrancers memorize verbal formulas and the gist of the tale, law, etc., and then remake the tale, law, etc., using the verbal formulas according to the gist of the thing, much as, for example, jazz musicians do as they go off on a riff. Writing, though, freezes in time a particular telling of a tale or law or ritual, which reinforces psychological tendencies towards exactitude and veracity. Example, if it wasn't true, someone wouldn't have taken the time to write it down, right? Which can lead a society or a religion to stagnate and ossify, as the literate elite insist upon strict observance despite changing contexts. Now, as we know today, writing itself was invented independently in many areas around the world as a system of accounting for redistributive economies. If you want to know more about redistribution, watch my video on that. Usually, the scripts started out as pictograms, pictures, which gradually turned into logograms, or abstract pictures, then eventually into phonetic symbols. While the peoples of the ancient Near East used clay tablets on which to write, the ancient Greeks and Romans followed the practice of the ancient Egyptians in using papyrus on which to write. Papyrus, a thick paper-like material made by weaving the stems of the papyrus plant together, layering them at right angles to each other, and then gluing them, while still moist, pounding them together into a single sheet, then dried under pressure, polished, and glued together, one sheet to another, to form a scroll, a longer roll, then attached usually to a wooden stick, as seen here, all of which meant writing could only be done on one side, the top following the fibers. Now, scrolls were unrolled side to side, as seen here. They're not unrolled from top to bottom, but always side to side. They would have been written in columns, again, side by side from top to bottom, and stored in round boxes or chests, as seen here. The only exception to the use of papyrus among the Greeks and Romans, and this continued down through the Middle Ages, was the wax tablet, pictures of which you see here. These were a flat piece of wood, somewhat hollowed out, in which enough wax was poured to record letters and symbols via a metal stylus. And these were primarily used for taking notes, writing your to-do list, bookkeeping, laundry and grocery list, etc., as the tablets were reusable, unlike parchment. This is very similar to the My Slate tablets sold, at least in America, where writing is done on a top piece of cellophane. One of these here, right on top, below, which picked up impressions from a crayon-like material at the bottom, which was easy to erase simply by, as shown here, simply lifting both sheets off the bottom. And so, with wax tablets, the wax could be smoothed over easily, or scraped out and new wax poured in, and then reformed into a blank. Now, writing was done with a metal stylus, as you see here, similar to a modern stylus used to quote-unquote write on computer screens, but writing on wax required more pressure than writing on papyrus or parchment, and the stylus had to be lifted to change the direction of the stroke, which meant letters were normally more angular than rounded, as shown here, and while it's not impossible to write what you would call a cursive, it was pretty next to impossible. For some reason, disputed by scholars to this day, the Codex Format. And the Codex Format, as you see here, here's the roll, side by side. The Codex is our normal book of today. The Codex Format of leaves of uniform size, bound along one edge, held between two covers, perhaps evolved from binding several wax tablets together. For example, here, these are different wax tablets. You could bind them together on one side. Now, and again, you can see it again here, more wax tablets bound together like this. The Codex Format using parchment instead of paper certainly became popular among early Christians, and over the 3rd and 4th century AD replaced the Papyrus Scroll. Perhaps since parchment can be written on both sides, while the format makes the codex, the book, far more portable, storable, searchable, in other words, you can have page numbers, and readable than the scroll. The cost of books remains a matter of great debate, since, except for the shortest text, publishing and selling wax tablet books would have been price prohibitive given the many tablets required for anything longer than a few pages, and may perhaps be one reason why the Codex Format became popular among the early Christians. Book prices for papyrus scrolls would, of course, have varied, depending on not just supply and demand, but the amount of papyrus needed. Remember, papyrus could only be grown in Egypt, and any weather or civil disruptions there or in transit, say piracy, hurricanes at sea, storms at sea, would have badly impacted the supply. And while most scribes were slaves, scribal slaves, slaves that knew how to read and write, cost far more to buy, feed, and treat well than simple laborers. As an example, the Roman writer Martial himself said, a book of his poems costs on average 6 to 10 sesterces, whilst the Roman author Gellius said a collector friend of his bought an early copy of the second book of Virgil's Aeneid for 20 aurei. That's gold pieces. Now, this at a time when a common laborer earned about 3 sesterces a day. So a book of Martial's poems would cost about 2 to 3 days' work for the typical laborer. And the aurei, almost out of reach. This indicates that all but the most deluxe books would have been affordable by most of the urban artisan class, however, perhaps even the common laboring classes, and those who could not afford lengthier works could either acquire them piecemeal one scroll at a time, or read them in one of the empire's many public libraries. The wrap-up quote: "What you would gain by it in the way of learning, even if you should put books under your pillow and sleep on them, or should glue them together and walk about dressed in them." Lucian of Samosata. Let me know what you think of this quote in the comments section below. Also, what you liked about this video, and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos. And click on the little bell thingy so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. If you want to know more, there are recommended studies on this topic in the description below, along with other ways to connect with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the past.